Good morning, folks. We're going to allow others to sign on, and they're signing on rapidly, and then we'll get started. We're going to give it about another minute, everyone. Welcome, and we'll kick it off. People are signing on as I speak. We had a very large number of people who registered for this morning's event. So hang tight, we'll get going soon. Well, good morning, and welcome to NECEC's Emerging Trends Series, Regional Offshore Wind Strategies. I want to welcome you this morning. My name is Joe Curtatone. I'm the president of NECEC for just over 2 weeks now, and I couldn't be more excited about my new role and the work that lies ahead for our team, our members, our region. NECEC is working to cultivate a climate ecosystem towards a greener future, bringing together clean energy companies, sustainable investors, state and local governments, and nonprofits looking to make the industry more vibrant, equitable, and inclusive. And we'd ask those interested in helping us advance this mission, consider joining us as members. I also want to welcome the many elected officials and all of you for joining us this morning. And if we don't catch your name here, please give us a shout out in the chat and we'll make sure to recognize you. But from the many local and regional officials and state who've been part of this movement, we also give special recognition to representatives from Senator Whitehouse's office, Karen Bradbury, from Senator Reed's office, Rachel Mitnick, Massachusetts State Representative, who you'll hear as part of the panel, Jeff Roy, Massachusetts State Representative Tom Vitolo, and representatives again from federal, state, and municipalities across the Northeast region. Nowhere is our collective work more impactful than offshore wind. This sector where clean energy, equity, jobs, and economic development are really coming together across our 7-state region and beyond. Now, the analogy I keep using for the energy opportunity offshore wind presents to the Northeast is we are basically Texas before the oil boom. We are literally sitting next to an ocean of renewable energy. We have the wind resources to play an outsized share in powering every device, every light, every vehicle, and to heat and cool every building in the most densely populated region in our nation. And to really have the energy left over to export it to other areas of the country. It is the foundation for a transformational economic boom. In the last couple of weeks alone, and we've seen the news in the offshore wind industry has been just remarkable, from BOEM leases to New York and Massachusetts offering bold strategies to the news of the purchases and sale agreements between Nyserda and Ecuador and BP for Empire Wind 2 and Beacon Wind 1, and a sign just really of the momentum that is building with incredible velocity. But if we don't do this right, this will be just the beginning of a sustainable, thriving, and equitable industry for decades to come. Yet that vision, I think we understand, won't happen overnight, and it will require thoughtful steps from the public sector, from the federal government, to our cities and towns, from our developers to our community colleges and universities, and really from all of us. One area we should be exploring is how all of the different players in our region can work together to build this offshore wind future the right way, in a way that truly delivers benefits to communities left out, and even those injured by previous economic booms. And the NECEC, we're just excited to play a key role in facilitating that effort. That's why I'm excited to announce the formation of NECEC's Offshore Wind Working Group, a group focused on the development issues facing the industry with the explicit recognition that it will take a local and regional approach so that it is built to last. We will be working closely with our members, our state, federal, and municipal partners, and all of you to drive this prosperity to every corner of our region and beyond. Our policy team will be following up with the details, but our inaugural meeting will take place on Wednesday, February 2nd. So more to come. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Director of BOEM, the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Amanda Lefton. Before I introduce her, I'd like to read a brief bio about her. Prior to leaving as the serving as the director of BOEM, Amanda Lefton most recently served as the first Assistant Secretary for Energy Environment for the Governor of New York, where she led the state's climate and environmental initiatives and managed a portfolio of 12 agencies and authorities. In this role, she championed an advanced implementation of landmark, nation-leading climate and renewable energy strategies. Now, previously, Amanda was the Deputy Policy Director for the Nature Conservancy in New York, worked in the labor movement for the Rochester Regional Joint Board of Workers United and for the New York State Assembly. And she also worked for the state Senate. She's originally from Queens, New York. Ms. Lefton grew up on Long Island, New York, and holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Albany. And we are just thrilled to have her with us. So I want to, no further ado, like to turn it over to Director Lefton. Welcome, Director. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, and congratulations on your new position. I'm sure you will do great things leading this important organization. And thank you so much for having me here today. As Joe mentioned, I'm the Director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, and on behalf of the United States Department of the Interior, thank you to the Northeast Clean Energy Council for inviting me here today to discuss BOEM's priorities and the role of the federal government on advancing offshore wind. Admittedly, I may be biased, but I would like to start by congratulating the Northeast region on your remarkable leadership in advancing offshore wind. In many ways, the Northeast has not only driven progress on offshore wind for many years, you've also given the sustained effort that's allowed us to get us to where we are today. And again, I promise I'm not just saying that as a native New Yorker, but in fact, because we have seen just really the fruits of your labor so far. I'm particularly glad to be here today because it marks the 1-year anniversary of the Biden-Harris administration. A year ago today, Biden-Harris was sworn into office, kicking off a new focus on combating climate change and building a clean energy economy. And since his first week in office, President Biden has made tackling the climate crisis a centerpiece of his Build Back Better agenda. And unlocking the economic potential of clean energy is a critical part of this effort. Early on, the Biden-Harris administration set a target to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, which could create nearly 80,000 good-paying jobs. BOEM is playing a central role in accomplishing this target and ensuring our country is using our incredible resources to address climate change. In the past year, BOEM has approved the nation's first 2 commercial-scale offshore wind energy projects in federal waters, the 800 megawatt Vineyard Wind project and the 130 megawatt South Fork project. We've initiated the review of 9 additional projects, and by 2025, we expect to hold up to 7 additional offshore lease sales across the country. The first of these sales under this administration will happen next month. Just last week, the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, announced the upcoming offshore wind energy lease sale for the New York Bight. With 6 lease areas covering nearly 500,000 acres offshore New York and New Jersey, the New York Bight auction will offer the most leases of any offshore wind sale to date. Offshore wind development within the New York Bight could generate up to 7 gigawatts of clean energy, and that's enough to power 2 million homes. We also expect that this will create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs in the region. To help spur this important economic development, we're advancing several innovative lease stipulations and programs for the Bight. From the start, the Biden-Harris administration has made it clear that offshore wind energy development must create good-paying union jobs. That's why we're including a new lease stipulation that requires lessees to make every reasonable effort to enter into a project labor agreement to help ensure future projects in the Bight are built by union labor. A recent report indicates that the United States' growing offshore wind industry presents a $109 billion opportunity for supply chain businesses over the next decade. And we know that we need a robust and resilient domestic supply chain to deliver the economic benefits offshore wind to residents in New York, New Jersey, and the surrounding regions. So as a result, we're including new mechanisms to incentivize a supply chain in the final sale notice. The Bight's final sale notice includes an operating fee credit if the lessees buy American-made offshore wind components. We're also requiring lessees to submit a supply chain plan and establish clear goals on how they will contribute to or invest in domestic supply chain improvements. At BOEM, we also appreciate the critical importance of meaningful engagement early and often in the process. To that end, we are requiring that lessees engage tribes, underserved communities, and ocean users who could be affected by offshore wind development. And we're going to hold companies accountable for improving their engagement, communication, and transparency with these communities. Without a doubt, collaboration with states is also important to achieve our mutual goals. In addition to announcing the New York Bight last week, Secretary Haaland and Governors Hochul and Murphy also came together to announce a shared vision, a vision for developing a robust offshore wind domestic supply chain that will deliver benefits to the residents of New York and New Jersey and the surrounding regions, including an emphasis on underserved communities. We really hope that this collaboration will serve as a model for future engagement and establish the US as a major player in the global offshore wind market. All of these activities build on the department's ambitious multi-year offshore wind leasing strategy that Secretary Haaland announced last fall. This strategy demonstrates our commitment to responsibly accelerate our nation's transition to a clean energy future with certainty and transparency. By providing a clear direction on our path, we're trying to remove the guesswork and inspire confidence among the industry. We're also showing ocean users and other stakeholders where we're heading. We want them to know what regions are being considered so we can engage with them early and often to identify areas of least impact. Even with these exciting developments and a clear path forward, what I always remember is that the federal government can't and shouldn't advance offshore wind energy on its own. That's why we're partnering with other federal agencies to ensure increased confidence in domestic supply chain investments. But also, our success will also depend in large part on the strong partnerships with states and industry. Through state action, including several Northeast states, the industry is already taking the initiative to spur investments in a domestic supply chain. Some of these projects that we're already seeing include the first offshore wind towers and transition piece manufacturing facility in New York, a first of its kind wind energy port in New Jersey, a renewable energy center with a high voltage direct current converter and on-site battery storage in Massachusetts, a foundation manufacturing facility in Rhode Island, and an upgraded pier to accommodate offshore wind turbine assembly and installation staging in Connecticut. I'm especially grateful for these Northeast states whose consistent and enduring efforts have helped make offshore wind a reality. We also know that listening to the needs of ocean users and communities is a critical part of our success. That means we work to consider the needs of various ocean user groups throughout offshore wind energy development. And it also means that we rely on the best available science and traditional knowledge to inform our decision-making. Because we know responsible offshore wind development isn't static. That's why our process has evolved over the years as we've identified ways to refine our management efforts and ensure that we are good stewards of our ocean resources. Moving forward, we'll provide more clarity on our processes, increase our efficiency, help avoid impacts to the environment and ocean users where possible, and ensure that we continue to develop offshore wind in a responsible way. We'll continue to engage in conversations and collaboration to develop solutions that will meet the needs of our partners, stakeholders, ocean users, and this new and growing industry. There is no doubt that the Biden-Harris administration's offshore wind agenda is ambitious, but we know that it's also realistic and achievable, and what's more, it's absolutely necessary. In his first year in office, the Biden-Harris administration, our country has made remarkable progress to advance a clean energy agenda, including historic developments in offshore wind. Our efforts have resulted in actual on-the-ground progress. The first 2 commercial-scale offshore wind projects in federal waters will be in construction this year, and we're seeing tremendous investments to develop a domestic supply chain happening all across the country. Throughout the process, we've worked to ensure that underserved communities have a place at the table, and we're creating good paying union jobs that will make our country stronger and more resilient to the changing climate. But we know that in order to realize the full environmental and economic benefits of offshore wind energy, we must foster strong partnerships with leaders like you in the Northeast. Continuing these productive conversations helps lay a foundation to advance U.S. offshore wind in a responsible way to achieve our shared goals. Working together, we have the opportunity to advance offshore wind development and help create a cleaner and more equitable energy future for our nation. I know that we can, and I know that we will. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Director Lifton. And I know you're well appreciated. Thank you for your time. We know your time is short, but I did want to follow up with one question related to the theme of today's event, and you've touched on a bit. If you could speak to the Biden-Harris administration's prioritize, including BOEM, doing or how it is working to encourage states in our region to coordinate their efforts to grow offshore wind sector for a benefit of all rather than just a state by state.
Absolutely. So, at first I really acknowledge and I want to note that for many years, the states have done just tremendous work in helping to drive the procurement and continue the conversation on offshore wind. And over the last year, we've seen tremendous progress from the federal government in advancing permitting efforts and other efforts to really drive towards these projects becoming a reality. Yet still, as we continue to move forward, what will be, I think, critical to our shared success is collaborating across the federal government, and perhaps even more importantly, collaborating as a region and for states to work together. I think we all share the goal, and we all want to see investments in a domestic supply chain. We all want to see the benefits from manufacturing, the benefits from job creation. Not only do we want to see these projects built with American union labor, we also want to see the components being built in the United States. And the states have a really powerful tool in helping to drive some of that investments through their procurement mechanisms. But I think it's so important that we're really seeking to do that regionally and working together so that we can establish what I'll call an efficient and robust supply chain by ensuring that there is coordination across states, because some are really, really well suited to capture certain parts of these industry, whereas other states might have other strengths through ports, through manufacturing facilities, but whatever the particular relevant piece is. And so I believe that really having the states work together collaboratively to identify those strengths and really seek to capture that part of the supply chain, we can truly build something that will be meaningful and lasting and really reap the full benefits that we're all seeking.
Great. Thank you. Well, on behalf of all of us, Director Lifton, I want to thank you for your leadership, and to BOEM and to the Biden-Harris administration, and for you joining us today. And we all look forward to working with you and your team. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. Pleasure to be here, and congratulations again.
Thank you. And now we're going to turn to one of NECEC's key partners, Nyserda. As you all know, Nyserda, under the leadership of Governor Hochul and CEO Doreen Harris, has set an aggressive pace for offshore wind development in the Empire State. And we are fortunate to be joined by George Sassine. He's the Vice President of Large Scale Renewables from Nyserda. He's here to provide an overview of New York's perspective and their recent efforts and where he sees opportunities for states working together. George is again the Vice President for Large Scale Renewables at the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority, Nyserda. And he leads Nyserda's work in advancing both land-based renewable energy and offshore wind resources. And prior to joining Nyserda in September of 2021, he spent nearly 10 years at General Electric, where he took on wide scope of responsibilities, including strategy and scenario planning, product management, innovation, marketing, and business development. And he started his career in engineering and policy analysis roles with the United Nations Development Program, UNDTP, in the Middle East, and a couple of think tanks in Washington, DC. George has also worked with several multinational corporations, driving policy analysis, investment and business strategy, including Deutsche Bank's Energy and Climate Change Advisors team in New York, and Man Group's Energy Private Equity Fund in London. He is also the founder of a nonprofit that advocates for transparency and good governance in the energy industry. George has a BE in mechanical engineering from American University in Beirut and a Master of Public Policy from Harvard University. Folks, please join me in welcoming George Sassine. And George, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you to the NECEC for convening us on this important topic today. It's an honor to be here representing the state of New York and Nyserda. And I wanted to talk to you today about two things. First, I wanted to give you a quick update on offshore wind developments in New York, especially after the many exciting announcements from our governor these past few weeks. And second, I want to discuss various opportunities for states to work together to achieve our shared vision of a thriving offshore wind industry. So New York has a target of 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, and that number will certainly grow. But to put it in context, the main driver of New York's clean energy ambition is our Climate Act, which mandates us to reach 70% renewables by 2030 and 100% zero emission electricity by 2040. And offshore wind plays a central role in reaching these goals. And as of today, New York has the most active offshore wind portfolio in the US. And we have 5 projects of about 4.3 gigawatts and 5 active ports that support offshore wind manufacturing and O&M operations. And 3 weeks into the new year, this month of January has already been tremendous for offshore wind in New York. A few days ago, our governor announced that Nyserda finalized its contracts with Equinor and BP for Empire Wind 2 and Beacon Wind. And these projects will deliver about 2.5 gigawatts and will launch major supply chain investments. And Governor Hochul also announced the first round of competitive awards under the state's $20 million Offshore Wind Training Institute. And it's the largest public investment in offshore wind workforce development by any state in the US. And as Director Lefton mentioned earlier, last week, BOEM announced it will be holding a wind auction on February 23rd for 6 lease areas in the New York Bight. And this ties nicely with New York's plan to launch its 3rd solicitation round in early 2022, shortly after the completion of the New York Bight auction. And we're very excited about this upcoming solicitation. Governor Hochul made it very clear in her State of the State address a couple of weeks ago that cementing New York's place as the national hub for offshore wind is a top priority for us. And she announced proposals to invest $500 million in offshore wind supply chain. And we will also initiate the planning of an offshore wind transmission network to power 4 million New York City homes. And we will launch an offshore wind master plan 2.0 that assesses deep water opportunities. So in summary, just in the last couple of weeks, New York announced 2.5 gigawatts of contracts signed, 2 workforce and training initiatives, our upcoming 3rd solicitation in line with BOEM's New York Bight auction, $500 million for offshore wind supply chain, transmission planning, and launching a deep water master plan. These are very big announcements, and we couldn't get to where we are today and definitely can't achieve our ambitious goals going forward without deeper collaboration and coordination. And so when I think about the various ongoing regional collaboration initiatives, I like to segment them in two parts. Now, the first one is the collaboration between federal and state governments and agencies. And the second one is interstate collaboration with states working amongst each other. And there are several examples of federal and state collaboration around offshore wind, and I'd like to mention a couple of them. The first is the collaboration between BOEM, New York, and New Jersey, where we released a shared vision for the offshore wind supply chain just last week. And this document solidifies our shared commitment to cooperate and partner to advance our common interests around supply chain. And the ambition is that this collaboration would serve as a model for future engagements and establish the US as a global leader in the offshore wind market. The second example is a collaboration platform that Nyserda helped build around R&D and offshore wind innovation. In 2018, we established the National Offshore Wind Research and Development Consortium, which is a multi-state, multi-organization initiative that involves Massachusetts, Virginia, Maryland, and others. And last year, the federal government funded $8 million to 15 offshore wind R&D projects through this consortium. And so, these are great examples of how states are working today with each other and the federal government. And one of the main benefits of aligning federal and state initiatives is to bring predictability and consistency to the offshore wind market and reduce risks to developers and the private sector to engage in the industry. And so one of the main value propositions in my mind of federal and state collaboration is really that topic of predictability and consistency. The second type of collaboration is the interstate partnerships. And one of the most important initiatives, in my opinion, is a working group of 9 states that are focused on fisheries compensation. And these states are partnering together to encourage BOEM to develop a standardized compensation mitigation framework that's consistent and equitable and transparent across the whole region. And it's a great example that showcases that there's strength in numbers and that regional alignment is important to speak in one voice and have federal agencies listen and take action. And there are many other interstate initiatives focused on topics related to wildlife and maritime issues. For example, in 2019, New York and Massachusetts helped develop a regional wildlife science entity. And that grew to include other states like Maryland. So from all the examples that I mentioned, there are ongoing initiatives around fisheries, stakeholder engagement, R&D and innovation. And all these topics have established collaboration platforms and working groups that can be expanded and have other states and other stakeholders join. But there are also other areas and topics that could benefit from further federal and regional collaboration, including how to advance equity and benefits to disadvantaged communities. And another big one is making progress on regional transmission planning. And beyond identifying topics and areas of collaboration, collaboration itself can take several forms. It could be around funding, whether it's working together to access funds or sharing funds or pooling funding opportunities. And collaboration could also mean collecting and sharing data and insights. And it can also be focused on exchanging policy best practices and take many other forms. So, as my speaking time comes to an end, I want to leave you with one simple parting thought. The offshore wind industry is going to be a critical piece of the clean energy puzzle, and it's going to be more than $100 billion industry in the US by 2030. And we can only achieve the full potential of this new economic opportunity if collaboration and coordination are at the core of our planning. And it's going to be critical if we want to build an offshore wind industry that's both responsible and cost effective. Thank you. And with
Thank
that,
you.
I'd love to pass it on to Joe or Jeremy.
Thanks, George. But I have one question in speaking related to collaboration and coordination. If you could speak to what can NECEC or our member companies be doing more to contribute to that collaboration, help build a sustainable industry that is really built to last over the long term?
No, absolutely. Like organizations and platform like the NECEC are going to be critical going forward. Like I just said, collaborating, among states and states with the federal agencies. And I didn't really talk about the private sector or other stakeholders because that was not the topic of today's talk. But collaboration with different stakeholders and local communities is really critical to us succeeding together going forward. And NECEC, there's no doubt that you should be playing a big role in convening all these different stakeholders and providing a platform to have a dialogue and partner together on how we move forward. I couldn't stress this enough, and this is really genuine on behalf of New York. It's been, stakeholder engagement has been really at the core at everything we've been doing to advance offshore wind, and there's a reason why we're ahead of the curve. Like it's, we've been at it for many, many years, and we started and are continuing with stakeholder engagement. So it's going to be vital going forward, no doubt about that.
Well, thank you, George, and to you and to CEO Doreen Harris, to Governor Hochul for all the great work you're doing at Nyserda and New York State. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. And now I'm going to hand over the program to my colleague, Jerry McDermott. He's the NECEC's Vice President for Policy and Government Affairs. He's going to introduce our esteemed panel, which will dig a bit deeper into the issues of regionalizing the offshore wind development and how states can work together to increase prosperity and sustainability for all of us. Jeremy?
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you all for joining us this morning. We, as Joe mentioned, have an all-star lineup of leaders today that I want to jump right into. And the way this is going to work is that each panelist will have a minute to introduce themselves, to talk about where they sit in the offshore wind space and what their goals are. And then we're going to have a conversation about, where there's more room for collaboration, where it fits in between industry, between the federal government, states, cities, and other stakeholders in the community. And from NECEC's perspective, what we want to see is we want to see an inclusive and sustainably developed offshore wind industry that plays that core and essential role in the just transition to a clean, climate-friendly economy. And both Director Lefton and George touched on that, and we're going to dig in a little bit deeper. We also want to hear what's on your mind as well. So we're going to reserve time at the end of the session to take questions from the audience. And as indicated on the next slide, please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen so we can see the questions, and we will do our best to try to answer as many as we can in the time allowed. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce first Representative Jeff Roy, state representative from Massachusetts 10th Norfolk District. And he is the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Telecommunications and Energy, and is likely to tell you about a little bill that he and his colleagues released last week. Representative.
Jeremy, thank you so much. What an exciting program, and what a great kickoff by the keynoters. As Jeremy indicated, I'm Massachusetts State Representative Jeffrey Roy. I'm currently the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. And I was appointed to that position just last February. So I've only been on the job for about 11 months. But I can tell you from the perspective of offshore wind, this has been the most exciting, most riveting, and I view it as a constellation of the stars, beginning with, the inauguration of President Biden. And immediately we saw a shift in the offshore wind space. And immediately upon my appointment as the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Chair, I'll call it TUE from the moment on. But as soon as I got that appointment, the Speaker tasked me with reviewing what's happening in Massachusetts relative to the offshore wind industry. And I met with, hundreds of folks and stakeholders industry representatives and other officials, international officials, to get a real handle on what's happening. And we authored a report back in the fall of 2021 outlining the state of the offshore wind industry in Massachusetts. I have to admit, I was a little nervous handing a 120-page single-spaced document with graphs and charts to the speaker, but I can tell you he was thrilled to get it, thrilled that I had taken a deep dive into that area. And the next step was produce a piece of legislation that really advances offshore wind and clean energy in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I'm happy to report that just a few days ago, in preparation for today's event, the TUE committee released a bill that really is a sweeping set of ideas and concepts to really advance offshore wind industry in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure we'll get into some conversation later on, but that's who I am, and that's my introduction to the offshore wind industry.
Well, thank you, Representative. And there is a lot to talk about, and I appreciate you holding the bill until this session to make it a good topic of conversation. Now I want to turn to Selena Cunningham, who is the Deputy Director of the Governor's Energy Office in Maine and has been doing a lot of work on how Maine sees its own offshore wind future. So Selena.
Hey, Jeremy, nice to be here today. Exciting conversation and topic, and couldn't be more timely. So in Maine, we have been really working on identifying how best to focus on our strategic advantages when thinking about building an offshore wind industry. And this includes taking a look at our historical experience in the maritime industry, as well as advances in the floating technology. And we're doing this to meet our climate goals, to build our clean energy economy, and to really find a way to advance this technology sustainably in a way that will also work to respect and sustain our existing fisheries in the state of Maine, which are obviously incredibly important. And we're doing this through a number of avenues. On the first area where we're focusing is around strategic planning, and we're building a comprehensive roadmap that's really stakeholder-led, that takes a look at across the spectrum, where it is that the state needs to focus, whether it be around how best to use offshore wind to meet our energy needs and our climate goals, to what from a supply chain, workforce, ports, and transmission standpoint are the best way for the state to advance offshore wind. And a key component of all of this is recognizing the regional nature of the Gulf of Maine. And so working hand in hand with partners in the state of Maine, but also throughout the region. And so that's one of our planning efforts that we're working on. In addition to that, we're also pursuing a number of floating technology projects in the state, and hope to have the first offshore wind floating platform in the water in 2024. And I should start by just introducing the Governor's Energy Office, which serves as the state energy office for the state and is really coordinating offshore wind activity across the state and with other agencies working on this together. So great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Selena. Thanks for being here. And now I want to turn to Beth Treseder, who is the head of development for Equinor Renewables US. And we all saw the giant announcement last week with BP, and look forward to hearing your perspective, Beth.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. And thanks to NECC for having me today. I'm thrilled to be participating with my fellow panelists. Great introduction, Jeremy. That's obviously exciting news for us. For those of you who aren't familiar, Equinor is a broad energy company, and we're committed to providing affordable energy for societies worldwide, and importantly, taking a leading role in the energy transition. Equinor is on a journey to net zero emissions by 2050, and we are doing that by accelerating our growth in renewables, including offshore wind, as we're discussing today, pioneering developments in carbon capture and hydrogen, and optimizing our oil and gas portfolio. Our offshore wind portfolio in the Northeast includes our Empire Wind 1, our Empire Wind 2, and our Beacon Wind 1 projects, which will deliver a total of 3.3 gigawatts of power to New York, as George mentioned earlier. We're also developing 2 offshore wind ports, the Port of Albany and the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, and those will support the supply chain and operations and maintenance for offshore wind. So I look forward to providing some more detail and having this conversation today. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Beth. And it's a great and very important developer perspective that you're bringing to the table. And then our final panelist is Phil Jordan, who is the Vice President and Principal Researcher for BW Research, and has a sort of economic perspective around the workforce development and the opportunities that the supply chain presents. So Phil.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here today. And as my fellow panelists have mentioned, it's really a great kickoff and just such an exciting topic area and one that we're thinking about quite a lot. So BW Research is a research consulting firm. We do a lot of work with the U.S. Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Lab on a national level. And actually, we're working in one capacity or another with all of the northeastern states on their clean energy strategies and goals, understanding the economic and jobs impacts of transitions to a clean economy. And so we're, working with each state sort of individually, thinking about their competitive advantages, their workforce needs, their supply chain opportunities, and sort of how to meet the moment in a way that puts their state sort of at the best competitive advantage, and increasingly sort of recognizing how important collaboration is and will be to make sure that we develop some permanence for the supply chain opportunities, right? So a stronger economic opportunity for the region, as well as to really make sure that we're balancing all the different goals and objectives that the various states have. So I'm really excited to be part of this panel and thank NECEC for its leadership in convening so many different partners when there's so much at stake. When I think at the end of the day, this collaboration has an opportunity to help each and every state, as well as the United States, to compete globally in this sector. So thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to participate.
Great. And the way this is going to work is I will have a bunch of questions. Please turn on your cameras and join us, folks. And I want this to be a conversation, so you should feel free to challenge what other folks say, ask questions back to one another. I'm going to direct traffic as best I can, but hopefully say very little other than prompting the conversation. And so the first question is, what are the priority goals for each of you when it comes to the development of offshore wind in the Northeast? And I'm going to start with Selena and go to Beth, and then Phil, and then Chairman Roy, and then we'll mix it up. So. Priority objectives, Selena.
I think fundamentally we have clean energy requirements that the state has set, climate goals. We need to meet those. And we want to build a clean energy economy. We've set a goal of 30,000 new clean energy jobs. We need to meet that. And so how do we do that? We look at Maine is very different from other states in terms of geography, ratepayers, historic experience, and the amount of energy we need. So what we're focusing on is looking at the strategic advantages for our state. And we see that in a variety of ways. Number one is around floating technology. How can we continue to advance that? And number two is looking at how can we support the growth of the industry in the shorter term with the existing maritime trades and other resources that we have in the state. So we want a strategic plan that aligns with a realistic expectation of what we can deliver in terms of energy, economy, and growth of the industry. And that is necessarily going to be working with other states to help meet those goals. And so figuring out how best to do that is, I think, what we're all working together to try to do. We have some ideas, we have some existing relationships, but building on those. And that's why conversations like this are really helpful.
And I want to, when it comes to Chair Roy, I'm going to ask a slight variation, but Beth, I want to hear about your priorities and your sort of objectives as you sit in the development chair.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I'll do is first talk about Equinor's goals and then sort of what I hope the region's goals are, since I have that opportunity. So as Equinor, our first priority is supporting the state's mandates and targets in the transition to renewable power. Equinor's goals largely mirror the state's goals. Without any state goals and commitments, then we would have none. So that's first and foremost our priority in delivering on those goals in an efficient and responsible way. The onus is on us to deliver on state goals and in a competitive and inclusive way. I would say that involves delivering, not just supporting new renewable growth, but also delivering on the projects under development. We have a tendency to look forward, and that's always great, but there are a lot of projects that still need to be matured and delivered in a timely way. And delivering on all the commitments that we've made in terms of workforce development and economic benefit. So that's key in ensuring the responsible development of the industry more broadly. I have a couple of views on regional priorities as well. We've talked a lot about the Northeast leadership, and I hope that one of the priorities is maintaining this leadership and momentum for the industry and just continuing to become more efficient, whether that's in the leasing or the offtake process. As we develop more expertise across the states and mature this industry, I hope we can continue to increase our goals and become more efficient in how we manage offshore wind. So, and I guess I would just add that one of sort of the ways we can do that is educating the public about offshore wind. I think it's key to ensuring that stakeholders across the board are aware of what's happening along the coasts and are able to contribute to the industry.
I think one thing you said that I think is a theme that we want to pull out is sort of the enduring nature. We don't want this to be simply a boom that happens in the 2020s and then goes away or goes to another region. We want to be that catalyst leadership region for the long haul. And I think those are the piece building blocks we want to put in place over that period. And so Phil.
Yeah. So, I think obviously part of the excitement is the opportunity that exists. I'm also a bit concerned about the potential for a race to the bottom without collaboration. So in addition to the benefits of collaborating, they're sort of obvious. I think a lot about how pure competition without any collaboration sort of can set us all up for failure. So, as we think about how the US is potentially shifting its industrial policy generally, particularly in our competition with China, we are sort of recognizing that we're competing with a controlled economy, right? And so we don't have that here, right? We're not going to have a situation where Washington is going to say, okay, Maine, you're going to build this, and Massachusetts, you're going to build that, and New York, you're going to build this, right? We're not going to have a planned economy. So what often happens in that case is we end up competing ourselves to the bottom of the barrel. And that is something that I think we need to work very strongly at preventing from happening. And a couple of ideas on what I think could be useful here in terms of the types of things that I'm talking about in terms of goals. So as we start thinking about community benefits, commitments to equities, commitments to project labor agreements, all of these elements that meet specific goals that states have around job quality and equity and inclusion. When you really boil those down, those can get expensive, right? So it's a lot harder to train folks who live in communities that have had hundreds of years of disinvestment. And so if one state says we're committed to doing that and spending lots of money and another state does not, we could see a situation where cost competition creates an imbalance in the market. So I'm hoping that there can be some areas of collaboration, if not to the sort of Chinese planned economy approach, at least around the broad themes and principles of the types of investments and commitments that states will make to ensure that the collective goals are aligned and met.
That's a very good perspective, and I think we're going to dig into a lot of those sort of areas of collaboration as we move the conversation forward. Chair Roy, the slight variation on the question is, what are the priorities for you, and how do you think they're the same for Massachusetts, a state like Massachusetts, which has a very large load and population, and how is it different from a state like Maine?
Well, I'll share with you one of the lines that I shared with the speaker in the offshore wind report. It said Massachusetts is uniquely prepared to capitalize on the nation's emerging offshore wind industry and become the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind. And the National Renewable Energy Laboratory said Massachusetts waters have the largest technical offshore wind potential of any state in the contiguous United States. So our goals in Massachusetts and the goals that were set forth by Speaker Mariano very, very solidly. I mean, he's been in the offshore wind space going back several years with his first trip out to Denmark. But one of his key goals is to provide clean and reliable energy to the citizens of Massachusetts. Massachusetts, over the years, has not been known as a generator of energy. But here we have, sitting 14 miles off the coast of Massachusetts, some of the most robust wind in the contiguous United States. So we need to take advantage of that opportunity to become a generator of energy. And it just so happens that the energy that's available off the coast is clean energy. So it's just a real merging of those goals to get clean and reliable energy to the folks in Massachusetts. And I do believe on the collaborative front, one of the things that we highlighted in the report, and one of the things that is a component of the new legislation we filed, was looking at transmission as a regional issue. Instead of having a spider web of cables underneath these turbines, is there a way we can collectively and as regional states come together to figure out a transmission plan that avoids that spider web, but also provides a better way of getting that energy from the turbines to the plugs in people's homes?
So I want to follow up one question, Chair Roy, is you talk about, and obviously your focus is on Massachusetts, making Massachusetts a leader. How do we make Massachusetts a leader and contribute to making the region a leader? And where are the friction points, and where are the opportunities for rowing in the same direction?
Well, it's very difficult. The regionalization pieces are very difficult to pull off. And I think we're still recovering from the wounds of the failure of TCI.
Very much so.
And Selena, no undue issues, but we are also reeling from the vote to prevent hydro from coming from Quebec to Massachusetts. Those were some regional attempts that did not fare well. One of the other pieces that we are looking to do in our new legislation is to provide a more coordinating role for Mass CEC. And the idea of that is to make them a central player in Massachusetts that can advocate in a regional setting to try and introduce these regional concepts and maybe get a better engine for cooperation and collaboration among the states. I think it's important. Not every manufacturing facility is not going to be located in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. As much as I'd like to see that, I know that's not going to happen. But we're all close enough geographically, and we all know that climate issues have no borders. So if we do well in Massachusetts, and the folks in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut and Rhode Island do well, it's good for all of our areas. And we also know that when it comes to oceans, there are no borders in the oceans as well. So we really stand to gain from collaboration. And I'm hoping with some of the changes we have proposed in the legislation, we can make it work this time.
Folks want to react to that or follow up from Jeff's comments?
I'll just maybe quickly state that, there's a lot of questions about sort of why it's hard. And I think sort of recognizing the political reality is important, right? So if Chairman Roy does something that concedes a number of jobs from his district in Massachusetts to Rhode Island, those voters in Rhode Island are not going to reward Chairman Roy, right? And he may be punished by the voters in his district.
It might be illegal for them to help me with votes in that.
Right, that's probably a fair point, unless they move, but that's unlikely if you give them all those jobs, right? So I think there is just sort of a political reality, which is that we don't have a regional government that oversees how this would all play out, where there can be risks and rewards sort of centrally planned. So, regional collaboration is critical, but we have to recognize the political constraint, which is that we have a number of individual state governments, all of whom are charged with their own residents, right? And so there has to be a level of competition that exists because of that. And so that's why I'm hoping that sort of agreement around specific parameters and a focus on a race to the bottom and preventing that, so that there can be a level playing field of competition is something that can benefit the region as a whole.
Beth.
I just want to chime in on Chairman Roy's comments as well. I think that's where we're fortunate in offshore wind that all of the states have their own commitments towards the industry, because I think it is critical, as the chairman pointed out, that states support existing projects in other states. Certainly if we're delivering power to one state, that doesn't mean that we don't have stakeholders in our neighboring states. I'll use our Beacon Wind project as an example. We're delivering power to New York, but our New England stakeholders are incredibly important in the development of that project, whether that's other offshore users or the workforce. And so it's critical to us that other states support those projects, even if they're not delivering power to that state. And so, and I would just say that I think, again, we're fortunate in that all of the states have offshore wind commitments. And so, again, even if that project might not be delivering power to your state, you have other stakes in the offshore wind industry such that you would support sort of all of those projects so that the industry can mature. So I do think that states committing project or supporting projects, across state lines is incredibly important for the growth of the industry. And I think we've seen that, but I hope that that's something that we can continue to see.
I would just echo on the transmission piece without commenting on all the latest actions around transmission in the state, but just that, we are part of a regional grid. Our transmission issues are not unique to offshore wind, and they're not necessarily unique to the region. But I think that when it comes to coordinated transmission offshore, at least exploring the opportunity to work together, trying to figure out whether there is a way to, within our separate governments, figure out a way to work together to do that. I think that is something that we're certainly interested in. And then on the shared ocean, I just note that from a R&D research perspective, making sure that we share information around the resources and existing users is a key component of success of this industry as well. And so something that we're wanting to work on and focus on in addition to the technology piece.
Jeremy, let me add just one more piece. So I know that the great offshore wind work that's being done in the state of Maine will aid with the port infrastructure in Salem. They're actually looking at that port as a way to assist the state of Maine. So Maine will get a project and Massachusetts will benefit. I can conceive of a manufacturing facility in New Hampshire using consulting and legal services from Boston, or a metal fabricator from Lowell, and the Teamsters from Gloucester, research from Cambridge, and marketing firms. So there are opportunities. We don't have to grab everything. We can collaborate. How we make that happen is the mystery that we are aiming to solve.
And I guess that's the big question, the how, right? In the Phil Jordan view of the world, you'd have nacelles being built in, New York, and you'd have foundations being built in Rhode Island, and, staging in Massachusetts, and it would be sort of an edict, but that's not going to happen. How do we get that happy medium where we are taking advantage of the regionalization and the sort of proximity and the value of all these states in a way that's not prescriptive and benefits the industry?
So one opportunity that exists, I think, is that there are certain competitive advantages that each state has based on its economy and sort of history of its work and industry and workforce. And so many states, and we're working with these states, are looking at what are the industries that we have that could easily transition, especially industries that haven't been faring as well, that could easily transition to supply this growing market. That has not been done at a regional level, to my knowledge, in great detail. So we may know in Massachusetts or New York or Maine what the specific sort of adjacent industries are that can contribute and where those companies are located. But as a region, I don't think there's been a real deep assessment. You'd probably want to dig a bit further past New York. I know NECEC has, somewhat of a geographic boundary, but including New Jersey and really actually an argument can be made all the way down to North Carolina on that kind of an assessment, I think could be really, really helpful. And not just sort of what's there now, but by looking more deeply at what could be, I think could at least help identify where it would make sense. Whether or not states want to adhere to it, there is no binding anything, but it may help as the developers, the OEMs and the tier ones start thinking about location decisions and states start thinking about where to make investments, how to prioritize in a sort of an even world where things would make the most sense to happen.
I want to hear, perfect.
Yeah, I would just sort of build on what Phil said. I don't even think it requires sort of a large, complex, concerted effort, nor would I advocate for that. I don't think we have sort of the time to do that. But, I think just increasing transparency around state investments and state timelines, deciding early where to invest and then communicating that allows other states in the region and the private sector to plan in such a way that's cooperative rather than impinging on another state's efforts. So, I don't think it's realistic to assume that we would have some kind of, complex coordinated plan, but I do think that continuing to identify those areas of expertise or existing industries and then investing in them and then making that very clear allows other states to consider how they can adjust their portfolio accordingly. And it certainly helps to communicate that to the private sector, because then we also, speaking for Equinor, we can evaluate where to make those long-term investments. And when we look at those long-term investments, it's not that, building a manufacturing plant in one state would preclude using those components, throughout the region. I think the more that we build up the supply chain regionally, the more it really benefits all of the states in the region. The future projects can be more efficient in sourcing their components and workforce domestically. I mean, I think it has all kinds of benefits. So I would just say, again, sort of advanced planning and then transparency about those plans will allow for that coordination to happen somewhat organically.
I'll say this was a topic of the conversation that I had engaged in with Peter Abbott at the consulate, United Kingdom consulate, and he was saying he recognized that as a disadvantage for the United States, that in England it's one country and they can do this coordination very easily, but trying to get 7 or 8 states to work together is more difficult. But and again, I go back to us designating Mass CEC as a focal point for statewide coordination. I certainly envision Mass CEC and an organization like Nyserda working together to try and coordinate those efforts. And if we had similar entities in the other states, I think that's a step towards coordination. And my energy efficiency lights just went off in the office, so I need to move. So there we go.
Excellent. I want to come back to the idea of sort of regional procurements and sort of states working together to provide that sort of clarity and sort of visibility towards the long term and to doing procurements in a coordinated way. Is that something that's attractive to the industry, Beth? Is it something that's too much work and not worth it? What's your initial read on that?
I mean, it sounds ideal, but I think it would be much more difficult to implement. So, we have a lot of momentum in the Northeast, and I think each state has benefited from each successive commitment that we've seen by another state. the region, even without sort of maybe explicit coordination, the continued commitment to offshore wind by each successive state has had the impact of communicating to the private sector that this is a region worth long-term investment. Again, I think it was Phil's point, we are competing globally, and it's helpful when we have all of the states continue to commit. Again, I think it would be wonderful to see it would certainly require us to write fewer bids, to have one concerted effort towards offtake, but realistically, I think it's been functioning fairly well to look at each state's individual goals. And I think the developers, at least, Equinor, stand ready to deliver whatever the states communicate as their priorities. So, I think we'll again see, we've had, I think, examples of states making a commitment in a specific area, and then, I'll use our ports in New York as an example. We're going to make those investments and then be able to utilize those investments in future projects, regardless of where they're delivered. So, I guess I'm not going to hold my breath for regional procurement, but I do think that transparency about timelines and procurements, and again, advanced planning on not only when those will be, but how large they will be, allows a little bit more coordination. Ideally, we won't have procurements taking place, in such a way that they cannibalize each other, and we have to submit, competing bids to different states. So I think that transparency is helpful.
One question that came in from the chat is whether the ISOs should be involved in the procurements, and I think that there's a lot of challenge there in terms of what the ISO roles. But anybody want to chime in on that? I think it would be a very, very new and probably unwelcome role for the ISO to take up, given their role in sort of running the markets and sort of doing the transmission planning. I think the ISOs have a very important role on the transmission planning side. But now I've converted myself to a panelist, so I'm going to shut up. Talk about where storage fits into this picture in sort of firming up the offshore wind resources, and I guess back into where that sort of can flow in the coordinated flow of power across the region. And maybe, Beth, this is easiest for you, but I think anybody will have is welcome to hop in on that.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying, I think we see a lot of potential in storage, and it's certainly an area that we are keen to invest in. There are a lot of, I think as we see more offshore wind come online, the benefits of storage will become even more acute. And so, I will just say that I know that a lot of states have storage commitments, and that's another area where, again, the more commitments we see from the states, the more that communicates to the private sector and companies like Equinor that this is an area we need to invest in and continue to hire local resources in. So we've seen very positive momentum in that direction. And I think in some cases it's helpful when it's directly paired with offshore wind, because that allows us to sort of evaluate synergies. But there are also benefits to just continuing to procure storage independently.
And I'll just chime in from a slightly different tack that I just wanted to applaud New York's efforts on equity and environmental justice in this front, where they've not only committed to eliminating the diesel peaker plants in environmental justice communities in particularly New York City, but also in committing to building a large storage facility in and around, a former fossil plant in an environmental justice community. So really providing, sort of meeting a number of goals at the same time by developing storage that can be used, to offset the supply provided by those peaker facilities that were burning diesel in low-income communities. So just a great opportunity to sort of hit both of those, and just wanted to give a shout out to New York for prioritizing that kind of work as we talk about equity.
And that's a perfect example of the sort of transparency and sort of convening and sort of best practice sharing that can happen across the region. And I think that's sort of an area we haven't touched on yet is how do we make sure that this transition is just and follows the sort of is inclusive to all populations and does so in an intentional way. And Chair Roy, I think that there's environmental justice provisions in the roadmap bill that passed passed back last year or the year before, but was signed in March of 2021. I think the way that those provisions hit the ground is important and requires care and feeding. And so I guess what I'm saying is how do we make sure that we're doing that as well?
So you'll see in the legislation that we proposed that, we're looking at that as part of what we expect to see in the bids. How are the developers who are proposing these projects going to address environmental justice issues? And on the storage piece, we also have a long-term storage study component in the legislation requiring our Carbon Reduction Research Center to, optimize, the storage and look at those issues and issue a report on how we can better utilize it. Because certainly envision in the offshore wind space, a lot of times when energy is being produced, when we don't really need it, and we need a place to store it so that when we do need it, it's available for use. So looking at those pieces in the legislation and as part of the bids that we expect to see in the next round.
Selena, I want to turn to you for a second and ask about sort of the unique position that Maine is in with its, coastal economy, its relatively small load, and there's just the sort of the sort of political dynamics at play. How should Maine ideally fit into this mix?
Well, I think we can fit into the mix in a variety of ways, and just focusing, I think, on the conversation around equity and inclusion. What we're doing through our stakeholder conversations is trying to reach as many Maine people as we can across different spectrums and different industries to understand where people are at and where their priorities are. So I think bringing people into the conversation is the first piece of that. And then while we are small in terms of our load, I think we have a lot of potential when it comes to specific components of the offshore wind industry. Obviously, we have the University of Maine and their leadership on floating technology. But even beyond that, I think that it's picking out the pieces, as Phil's mentioned, where we do have certain history and can bring those jobs and specific skill sets to the industry. So that's where I think we are focusing. And then like other states, we also have set goals around not only clean energy, but also storage, and looking at the short-term storage needs, but also the horizon, and thinking about from innovation standpoint where we can invest R&D and focus our energy there. So while we may not have the budget of other states, I think trying to bring together a shared vision for what we want as a state and picking out a couple of pieces of where to put that energy is how we've been approaching it so far in the conversation in Maine.
So Jeremy, I think another thing to think about is in terms of the role of NECEC here as a convener, as well as sort of the recognizing the priorities of this administration as it comes to all of the different issues that they talk about, whether it's supporting labor unions and competitively bargained wages, or domestic manufacturing, or sort of clean energy goals, or equity. That this industry and this region are really the forefront of that, of those intersecting points. And so, one way to foster collaboration is when someone shows up with a gigantic bag of money. And so I do think it's worth sort of continuing conversations with Washington about how regional collaboration, especially on these issues of great importance to the administration, unions, domestic content, equity, can be, facilitated through some additional federal funding to make that happen.
Dollars from Washington.
Yes.
We have time for a couple more questions, and I'm going to see if you have any questions that you want to ask your fellow panelists first, and then I'm going to ask a couple questions that have come in from the audience. This is your chance, guys.
I guess I would just ask, and this is, I guess, to Selena or Chairman Roy, are there any lessons learned that you all have pulled from other states and incorporated into your plans?
I feel like every other week or so, I'm on the phone with other states trying to learn lessons from their experiences. I think it is looking at how, if you look at our roadmap effort, the studies that we are doing, we've taken a look at what, working with BW and other consultants, what information do we need to gather? And then from a stakeholder perspective, what conversations, how do you work with the fishing industry? How do you bring them to the table and have productive dialogue there? And so looking at Nyserda and others. And so that's where I find the kind of informal conversations to be most helpful with other states and we aren't the first ones down this road. So how do we learn and take those successes that other people have had? And then also when you look at the MOU with Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina, trying to pick those pieces that are creative and while there's still work to be done around that work, how can we, something like that or something similar, how can we start looking regionally at trying to shape a vision for the state too, or for the region too? So picking up pieces where we can.
And I will say that if you look at the legislation that we just filed, there are many pieces in there that address lessons learned. And I will say the transmission piece that we're including in the legislation, it was from looking at what New Jersey had done. We added the regional component, but that's something that's in our legislation, and certainly having conversations with other states and seeing what's happening in other states has been very enlightening, and seeing what's happened in other countries. We reviewed the activity, and if you look at the state of offshore wind report that we did, you'll see a whole section of where we looked at what other states were doing. Workforce development components that are in the bill are largely based on issues that were identified to us that, we need to have a skilled workforce. That's something we've heard over the course of the years, not solely on offshore wind space, but, industry in general. But we paid particular focus to that in offshore wind because we envision all these new jobs, which we don't even have titles for, but we need to have training out there. And I'm thrilled that we have places like Bristol Community College, Mass Maritime, and UMass Dartmouth jumping into that space already to try and offer some industry recognized credentials and other programs to get skilled workers, because I think that's a way for us to attract and retain workers. And so if I was to ask a question of a fellow panelist, I would point it to Beth and say, we're hoping that we have enticed you sufficiently to bid on a project in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Well,
I'll ask that in a form of a question.
I would just say, I think across the states, it's really encouraging to hear about the lessons learned, because I think, and certainly, Chairman, with what you're doing in the legislation, it's nice that we can look at what's been done so far, take lessons learned, and then be flexible about our policies and our legislation so that it accommodates those new lessons and take that into account and shape things as we continue to grow and mature this industry. I think we can incorporate that and then shift our policies a little bit to accommodate those learnings. So I would just say it's really encouraging to hear that we're bringing in those lessons learned and then utilizing them. We are always eager to participate in all all opportunities. I'll just leave it at that.
So one thing
I
that
forgot
we,
to mention one thing. We are anxiously looking at the research at the University of Maine on the floating offshore, because we think that's some exciting work. So that's another lesson learned. We're paying attention across the region.
it's great, and I think that there is opportunity across the region. One thing we haven't talked about is and this is a key element, is price and cost, and it's a key sensitivity. For all forms of energy, offshore wind, no exception. Where are the opportunities to put downward pressure on the cost of development through regional planning, coordination, collaboration?
So, and I may be connected to that, Jeremy. So one of the concerns that I'm sort of thinking through, right, and I don't know exactly how developers will approach this, but if every state ends up with an 80% local content requirement, and local is defined as their own state, one outcome is that a lot of temporary manufacturing facilities are built. Another outcome is that certain developers bid on certain states, and you reduce competition, and therefore can have price pressures. I don't know which way that would go or how that would play out. That's one of the things that keeps me up at night. So I guess one question is, how do we drive down costs? And the other question is, how do we prevent costs from going up dramatically with some of these initiatives? I don't have any answers, so I just thought I'd add your question.
You pile on a question on a question. I like it. It's a good strategy.
Yeah.
Our approach in Maine around costs has been to take a phased approach to development and have more hands-on experience with technology development to lower the low cost of energy over the long term. And also, I think the conversation around federal investment is really important when it comes to whether it be transmission or port development. And so making sure that we're building this industry with other resources in addition to just the cost of energy put to the ratepayers.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that there is significant competition in the private sector in offshore wind, and I think that has just had the effect of creating significant price pressure. So, we saw, I would say regardless of whether states have had price caps or not, we've continued to see the prices decline, which is purely based on the competition in the industry. And I think that's something we'll continue to see. But I think it's also important to balance that with evaluating not just lowest cost, but the long-term needs in the states. So as we look at, developing these industries or this industry, not just, for the short-term, purely clean energy, but also looking at developing the workforce. As Phil said earlier, we're trying to build out this industry in an inclusive way, and that's not necessarily the cheapest way to do it. So there has to be a balance, I think.
All critical points. Jeff, it looks like you're going to hop in. Sorry.
I was just going to say, cost remains an important component. We don't want to develop an industry that just puts a tremendous burden on ratepayers. And we are looking at that issue of cost very closely. I think the hearing we had just a little over a week ago spent a lot of time focused on that cost piece. But, it's really important that we look, at cost and balance it with economic development opportunities that, really can provide a future for the Commonwealth. And, some of our communities that have not really participated in economic gain over the years have a tremendous opportunity with what's out there in offshore wind to rebuild their communities. And I don't want to pick favorites out there, but, I focus a lot on a community like New Bedford, which was huge in the whaling industry 100 years ago. But, really, this is an opportunity for them to regain their position in the energy world, providing light from whale oil 100 years ago. They can really provide light from offshore wind in the 21st century. So I'm mindful of that and look forward to what this industry presents for areas like them and the rest of the Commonwealth.
It's important to note that you cannot separate cost from value, and those two things need to be discussed about at the same time. We have time for one last fast track question, and here's my question to each of you. We're going to go right down the line before I turn it back over to Joe. What are the three areas where regional collaboration in offshore wind matters most? 3 words, 3 things. I'm going to start with you, Selena.
Transmission, R&D, and fisheries mitigation, fisheries management issues.
Phil.
I'm going to go with equity, labor, and communication and transparency. That's 4, sorry.
Beth.
And say supply chain, workforce development, and stakeholders.
And Chair Roy, you get the last word.
Well, I'm going to also transmission. I mentioned transmission earlier in this. I think that is a key piece. Education is key to the success of this industry. And I agree with Beth on supply chain. That's something we really have to grapple with. I think the pandemic highlighted issues with supply chain in many areas. I see it particularly in the offshore wind space.
Well, listen, folks, on behalf of everybody who came to today's event, I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing your time and insights with us. It's been a pleasure, and you've given us a ton to think about and a ton to work on. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Joe Curtatone to close us out. Thanks again, folks.
Thanks, Jeremy. What a fantastic panel and a dynamic discussion. Thank you to all our panelists, to all our speakers, and to everyone who's joined us today. A couple of announcements before we sign off. We have 2 upcoming events we want to make everyone aware of. On January 31st, NECEC will be hosting our annual, now virtual, Clean Energy Day in Maine for our members and sponsors. So for more information, just contact us here. You want to contact Greg Oadoma, who has just joined the organization, our policy team. Then on March 23rd, we are putting on the second part of our Green Tie Gala. This will be an in-person event following all COVID guidelines and verifications. It'll be safe, it'll be great, and this will be happening. It's the tradition of recognizing leaders in our community and charting the road ahead, and tickets are now on sale. You can visit necec.org for more details. Finally, please, we would encourage everyone to complete the short survey at the end of the program. Your feedback is critical to making sure our events and our work continues to make a difference. Again, once again, we want to thank all our speakers, all our panelists, all our participants, and all of you for joining us today, all this work ahead of us. Have a great day. Thank you.